There is a quiet exhaustion that many people carry today, a feeling that no matter how many books they read, how many videos they watch, or how many spiritual techniques they try, something essential still seems missing. They search for signs, for confirmation, for a message that will finally explain why life feels slightly out of alignment. Some wait for the universe to send a signal. Others chase synchronicities, hoping that the next coincidence will reveal the answer they have been seeking. Yet beneath all that searching, there is often a deeper truth that remains unnoticed. The more intensely we look for answers outside ourselves, the further we drift from the place where those answers actually begin. For many people, this outward search feels natural. After all, we grow up believing that solutions come from teachers, experts, systems, and external validation. When uncertainty appears, the instinct is to look outward again. But the paradox of inner transformation is that clarity rarely arrives through more noise, more consumption, or more frantic questioning. Instead, it begins in the moment we slow down enough to notice what has been quietly unfolding inside us all along. What some traditions describe as a quantum connection with the universe is often misunderstood as something mystical or distant. In reality, it begins with something far simpler and more profound: awareness. The universe does not necessarily communicate through dramatic revelations. More often, it reflects back the state of our inner world, our attention, our emotional patterns, and the meaning we assign to our experiences. This is why the most powerful shift rarely comes from discovering a new external method. It emerges when a person realizes that the doorway they have been searching for has always been internal. When that realization begins to unfold, something subtle but powerful changes. The search stops feeling like a chase, and life begins to feel more like a conversation. For a long time, the habit of searching for answers outside ourselves can feel almost invisible. It becomes part of the rhythm of daily life. When uncertainty appears, the mind immediately reaches outward. It looks for guidance in other people's opinions, in predictions, in signs, in interpretations of what might happen next. This pattern is not born from weakness. It often begins with a sincere desire for direction, for clarity, for reassurance that life is unfolding the way it should. Yet over time, this constant outward focus creates a subtle distance between a person and their own internal compass. The difficulty is that external information multiplies endlessly, while inner perception grows quieter when it is ignored. When someone becomes used to seeking constant confirmation from the outside world, their attention gradually fragments. One voice says one thing, another source offers a different interpretation, and yet another perspective contradicts both. The result is not clarity but mental noise. In this environment, even genuine intuition can become difficult to recognize because it is drowned out by competing signals. Many people believe that the universe communicates primarily through dramatic events or unmistakable signs. But the truth is often more subtle. Life tends to reflect the internal state we carry more than it delivers instructions from the outside. When the inner world is tense, confused, or filled with urgency, reality begins to mirror that same tension. Situations feel rushed, decisions feel pressured, meaning becomes harder to interpret. What might otherwise appear as guidance can start to look like chaos. This is where the idea of frequency becomes useful, not as a mystical slogan, but as a way of understanding emotional coherence. Every thought, every feeling, every expectation shapes the atmosphere of the inner world. When these elements contradict each other, the internal environment becomes dissonant. A person might consciously desire peace while unconsciously sustaining anxiety. They might hope for clarity while feeding cycles of overthinking. In that condition, it becomes difficult for perception to settle long enough to recognize deeper patterns. One of the most misunderstood aspects of spiritual connection is the assumption that answers should arrive quickly once we begin looking for them. This expectation quietly creates pressure. Instead of listening, the mind starts demanding. Instead of observing, it begins interpreting every small event as a potential message. The search becomes intense, and that intensity ironically blocks the calm awareness required to perceive meaning. In psychological terms, the brain is designed to detect patterns that match emotional expectations. When someone lives in a state of urgency, the brain becomes highly sensitive to signals of uncertainty. It scans the environment constantly, trying to predict outcomes. This survival-based mode narrows perception. It makes subtle insights harder to access because attention remains focused on immediate problem solving rather than deeper understanding. At the same time, the body carries emotional memory. Experiences from the past, moments of disappointment, confusion, or loss of direction, leave traces in the nervous system. When similar uncertainty appears again, the body reacts automatically. The person may feel tension, restlessness, or the impulse to search for answers immediately. Without realizing it, they repeat the same cycle. Doubt appears, the search intensifies, and internal silence becomes even harder to access. This is why genuine inner connection rarely begins with finding something new. It begins with recognizing what has been interfering with perception all along. The shift is subtle but profound. Instead of trying to force meaning out of every event, awareness turns inward. Attention begins to observe the movement of thoughts, emotions, and reactions as they arise. What once felt like confusion starts to reveal patterns. In that space of observation, a different relationship with life slowly emerges. Events are no longer interpreted solely as problems to solve or signs to decode. They become experiences that reflect the dialogue between inner state and outer reality. The universe does not need to shout to be heard. Often it is the quiet adjustment of perception that allows a deeper form of communication to begin. There is a moment in every genuine inner journey when a person begins to notice something unusual. The difficulty of feeling connected to life rarely comes from a lack of knowledge. Information is everywhere. Advice is abundant. Methods promise clarity, alignment, manifestation, and transformation. Yet despite this ocean of guidance, many people still feel subtly disconnected, as if something essential remains out of reach. What often goes unnoticed is that the obstacle is not ignorance, but the internal state from which life is being perceived. Human perception is deeply influenced by emotional memory. Every significant experience leaves an imprint not only in thought, but also in the body's internal chemistry. Over time, repeated emotions become familiar landscapes. Stress becomes recognizable. Doubt becomes predictable. Even the search for certainty can turn into a habit encoded in the nervous system. When the mind tries to connect with something greater, while the body remains conditioned by past tension, a quiet contradiction appears. The person longs for expansion, yet their physiology continues to operate in patterns of protection and vigilance. This dynamic helps explain why moments of deep insight often arrive when the mind becomes calm, rather than when it is actively searching. In states of intense mental effort, the brain prioritizes survival-oriented processes. It scans for threats, evaluates outcomes, and calculates risks. These functions are useful for practical decisions, but they can also narrow awareness. The deeper layers of perception, those associated with creativity, intuition, and symbolic understanding, require a different internal environment. They emerge more easily when the nervous system shifts from urgency into presence. Many people interpret intuition as a sudden voice or dramatic realization, but more often it appears as a quiet form of coherence. It feels less like excitement and more like recognition. Something simply makes sense. A direction feels natural. A thought settles instead of spinning endlessly. These subtle signals become difficult to detect when emotional noise dominates the internal landscape. The brain, trained by repetition, continues to replay familiar interpretations even when new possibilities exist. The body participates in this process more than most people realize. Emotional states influence breathing patterns, muscle tension, posture, and even the rhythm of the heart. These physiological signals travel continuously between the body and the brain, shaping perception moment by moment. When someone lives in a prolonged state of urgency, the nervous system reinforces the same feedback loop. Thoughts generate tension. Tension reinforces anxious thoughts, and perception becomes filtered through that cycle. This is why the concept often described as a quantum connection with the universe cannot be separated from internal coherence. It is not merely an abstract spiritual idea. It reflects the alignment between thought, emotion, and awareness. When these elements move in conflicting directions, perception becomes fragmented. When they begin to synchronize, something remarkable occurs. The mind grows quieter, attention deepens, and patterns within life become easier to recognize. In that quieter state, experiences that once seemed random start revealing meaning. Conversations appear at the right moment. Ideas emerge with unexpected clarity. Decisions feel less forced. This does not necessarily mean that the universe suddenly changes its behavior. Instead, perception becomes refined enough to notice relationships and possibilities that were previously hidden beneath layers of mental interference. The shift from searching to sensing is subtle but transformative. Rather than treating life as a puzzle that must be solved immediately, awareness begins to observe how internal states shape external interpretation. The person becomes less reactive and more receptive. Moments of stillness no longer feel like emptiness. They become spaces where insight can surface naturally. When the mind stops insisting on immediate answers, it gradually rediscovers its capacity for presence. In that presence, the boundary between inner awareness and outer experience becomes less rigid. Life begins to feel less like a sequence of problems demanding solutions and more like a dialogue unfolding in real time. And within that dialogue, the connection that once seemed distant quietly reveals that it was never absent at all. At a certain point in the search for meaning, many people encounter an unexpected realization. The greatest obstacle to inner clarity is not confusion itself, but the deep desire to control how clarity should appear. The mind often believes that answers must arrive in a precise form, at a specific time, and with unmistakable certainty. When life does not deliver this type of confirmation, frustration grows. The person begins to question whether they are missing something, whether the universe is silent, or whether they are somehow disconnected from the guidance they hope to receive. This tension arises from a very human impulse, the need to reduce uncertainty. Throughout evolution, the brain has learned to prioritize prediction and control as ways to maintain safety. When the future feels unpredictable, the mind intensifies its effort to analyze every detail of the present. It looks for signals, patterns, and explanations that can restore a sense of order. Yet in the realm of inner awareness, this constant attempt to force understanding can become counterproductive. Life rarely reveals its deeper patterns through pressure. Meaning unfolds more easily in spaces where attention is patient enough to observe without demanding immediate resolution. When the mind becomes overly attached to certainty, perception narrows. Instead of noticing the subtle ways experiences connect, the brain focuses only on confirming or rejecting specific expectations. Anything that does not fit the anticipated answer is dismissed or overlooked. This dynamic is particularly visible in moments when people seek signs from the universe. The search becomes intense, sometimes even desperate. Every coincidence is analyzed, every event interpreted as potential proof of direction. While this effort may appear spiritual on the surface, it often reflects a deeper anxiety about trusting life's unfolding. The person wants reassurance before moving forward. They want confirmation before embracing possibility. What remains hidden beneath this behavior is the quiet influence of emotional memory. Past experiences shape the way uncertainty is interpreted. If someone has faced disappointment before, the mind becomes cautious. It tries to avoid repeating pain by demanding guarantees, yet those guarantees rarely arrive, and the tension between expectation and reality continues to grow. The paradox is that genuine insight tends to appear when control loosens rather than when it intensifies. When attention softens its grip on specific outcomes, perception becomes wider. The mind begins to recognize patterns that were previously invisible. Instead of searching for a single answer, awareness starts to notice the subtle coherence of experiences unfolding over time. This does not mean that uncertainty disappears. Life continues to move through unpredictable turns and unexpected changes. However, the relationship with uncertainty begins to evolve. Instead of treating the unknown as a threat that must be eliminated, it becomes a space where creativity and discovery can emerge. In that space, intuition gains room to operate. Intuition is often misunderstood as a mysterious force, but at its core, it reflects the brain's ability to integrate vast amounts of information beyond conscious reasoning. Memories, emotions, perceptions, and sensory details combine in ways that generate a quiet sense of direction. This process requires openness. When the mind insists on controlling every variable, the subtle integration that produces intuitive clarity struggles to unfold. Gradually, a new form of awareness develops. The person begins to notice how internal states influence the way life appears. Moments of tension create distorted interpretations, Moments of calm reveal deeper connections. What once seemed like an absence of guidance begins to look more like a reflection of internal pressure. Within this shift, the idea of a quantum connection with the universe becomes less abstract. It stops being a distant concept and begins to resemble a living interaction between consciousness and experience. The universe does not necessarily respond to demands or rigid expectations. Instead, it mirrors the quality of attention brought to each moment. When attention becomes quieter, the dialogue between inner awareness and outer reality becomes clearer. Life no longer feels like a puzzle demanding constant analysis. It begins to feel like a process unfolding through observation, participation, and presence. In that unfolding, answers do not arrive as commands from outside, but as insights that rise naturally from within. When the search for meaning gradually turns inward, something subtle begins to change in the way reality is experienced. Situations that once felt confusing or chaotic start revealing a different texture, not because life suddenly becomes simpler, but because the lens through which it is perceived becomes clearer. The mind begins to notice that the quality of attention brought to each moment quietly reshapes how events are interpreted. For a long time, many people imagine that connection with the universe depends on receiving something extraordinary, a sudden revelation, a powerful sign, or a moment so unmistakable that doubt disappears instantly. Yet the deeper transformation rarely begins with dramatic experiences. More often, it starts with small shifts in perception that accumulate over time. These shifts create a different relationship with thought, emotion, and the rhythm of daily life. One of the most powerful changes occurs when awareness becomes capable of observing internal reactions without immediately identifying with them. Thoughts continue to appear, emotions continue to move through the body, but they are no longer experienced as commands that must be followed automatically. Instead, they become signals within a larger field of awareness. In that space, a person begins to recognize patterns that once felt invisible. For example, the mind may notice how certain situations consistently trigger urgency or doubt. These reactions might have been interpreted in the past as signs that something is wrong or that an immediate solution must be found. With deeper awareness, the same reactions begin to look different. They reveal the echoes of old emotional conditioning rather than the voice of present truth. This recognition changes the entire landscape of decision-making. At the same time, the body becomes an important source of information. Emotional states leave physical signatures, subtle shifts in breathing, muscle tension, posture, and the rhythm of the heart. When attention becomes sensitive to these signals, they form a bridge between conscious awareness and the deeper layers of the nervous system. Instead of reacting unconsciously to every sensation, the mind begins to understand how the body participates in shaping perception. This integration between mind and body often creates a sense of internal coherence. Thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations begin to align more naturally. The inner environment becomes less fragmented. In that state, clarity emerges without force. Decisions feel less like calculations and more like recognitions of what already feels true. As this coherence deepens, the relationship with external events also changes. Life continues to present challenges, opportunities, and unexpected turns, yet the urgency to interpret every moment as a message begins to dissolve. Instead of chasing meaning in every coincidence, awareness starts to perceive how meaning arises through interaction with experience itself. Conversations with others may suddenly feel more significant. An idea might appear during a quiet moment and reveal a new direction. A situation that once seemed frustrating might later reveal a lesson that could not have been recognized earlier. These experiences do not necessarily feel supernatural, but they carry a quiet sense of alignment. They suggest that life is responding not to desperate searching, but to the quality of presence brought to each moment. In this context, the idea of a quantum connection with the universe becomes less about mystical communication and more about resonance. When inner states become coherent, perception becomes sensitive to the patterns that connect inner intention with external events. The person begins to sense that life is not simply happening around them, but unfolding in relationship with their awareness. This shift does not remove uncertainty from the human experience. Questions continue to arise, and the future remains open. Yet something fundamental changes in the way uncertainty is held. Instead of producing anxiety, it becomes a space of possibility. The mind no longer demands immediate resolution. It allows experiences to unfold with patience. Within that patience, life begins to reveal its deeper rhythm. Moments that once felt disconnected start forming a larger narrative. Events that seemed random begin to show subtle relationships with inner choices and emotional states. Gradually, the realization emerges that the connection with the universe was never something to be acquired. It was something waiting to be recognized through a quieter, more attentive way of being. In the end, the journey toward deeper connection is rarely about discovering something that was hidden somewhere far away. It is about rediscovering a sensitivity that was always present, but gradually overshadowed by noise, urgency, and the constant demand for certainty. For many people, the search begins with the belief that answers must arrive from the outside, from signs, systems, or voices that promise to reveal the path ahead. Yet the more deeply life is observed, the clearer it becomes that real transformation does not begin with external revelation. It begins with internal alignment. When attention becomes quieter, something remarkable starts to unfold. Thoughts slow down, emotional reactions become easier to recognize, and the mind regains its ability to perceive without constant interference. In this calmer state, the relationship with reality changes. Life no longer feels like a series of disconnected events demanding immediate interpretation. Instead, it begins to resemble a living dialogue, one in which awareness, emotion, and experience interact continuously. This is where the idea of a quantum connection with the universe becomes meaningful in a practical sense. It is not about controlling reality or forcing answers to appear. It is about cultivating a state of presence in which perception becomes clear enough to notice how life reflects inner states. In that clarity, intuition becomes easier to recognize, choices feel more coherent, and the sense of direction emerges naturally rather than through pressure. The search that once felt exhausting gradually transforms into something quieter and deeper. Instead of chasing certainty, awareness begins to trust the unfolding process of life itself. And in that shift, the most surprising discovery appears. The connection that once seemed distant was never absent. It was simply waiting for attention to return home. Have you ever wondered if the answers you've been chasing in the outside world were quietly forming inside you all along? Sometimes the most powerful shift in life begins with a single moment of awareness, when you realize that the direction you were searching for may already be unfolding within your own perception. If this idea resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next explorations about consciousness, inner transformation, and the deeper patterns shaping our reality. These conversations continue to unfold, and every new video builds another layer of understanding. And now keep the journey going. On the screen in front of you, another video is waiting that expands this same theme and reveals the next step in understanding how inner awareness shapes the life you experience. Continue watching and allow the dialogue between your inner world and the universe to deepen even further.